Welcome back to another episode of The Architecture of Health. I'm Deb Voisin, and my guest this week is Hannah from Hannah Presence Yoga. Welcome to the show, Hannah.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I just have to start by sharing with the audience how we met. You're over there in the UK, and I'm here in California in the United States. And on through COVID, Instagram stories became my favorite place to live. And somehow we crossed over where I was complaining enough about yoga injuries that someone introduced me to you because you had epiphanies about yoga that led you to change how you practiced yoga.
Absolutely. I think the person, the mutual friend, had sort of seen me moaning about certain things with the yoga industry and sort of seen you and thought, oh, you two could moan together.
Yes, and you're the one who really nudged me to start a podcast. So I want to thank you many times over for that.
Oh, amazing. No, you're going to be absolutely fabulous. I feel like you're born to do this.
Well, I thank you for your vote of confidence. So I know that you're a professional yoga and movement teacher, and you had this awakening. First of all, what got you even in this realm, and what attracted you particularly to yoga?
That's a good question. The first couple of times I went to yoga, I actually didn't like it. I could go too far to say I actually hated it. But then I came back to it a little bit older. How old was I? 25, 26. And I think I obviously had a different teacher, and it was that teacher that just resonated with me, and I loved it. So I think it was down to sort of age, and I needed a lot of stimulation, a lot more when I was younger, and I found that the yoga or the teacher wasn't quite stimulating me in the way that I needed, so I found it a bit boring. But yeah, so I just happened to move to a street that had a yoga studio on it. Unfortunately, it's nothing fancy, the story. I used to go to the gym. I used to do Muay Thai boxing. I was very much into boxing. I was very much into gym. It was all go, 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 go. And I don't know, I kept walking past the studio and they had a little sign outside. They had all these offers, and I thought it would be really good for me to do something that is more of a relaxing type of movement. Because, like I said, it was all quite aggressive boxing.
Right. It was balancing out some of your other on the go practices. Great. And then tell me about whatever epiphany you experienced that has been your biggest mindset change about yoga.
My biggest mindset change,
or change to your practice even.
Oh, I think it's my practice is developed from your sort of traditional yoga sequences like Ashtanga and your set sort of main poses, and it's developed more into mainly strength based poses. So I don't do a lot of the flexibility poses, and if I do them less frequently and for less. I hold them for a less period of time. But yeah, mainly going from something that's sort of flexibility based to something that's more strength based.
Great. Can you describe the difference? Like, what would 2 examples of a strength based yoga position versus a more flexibility based? I'm guessing flexibility would be like a passive forward bend.
Yeah.
And give us some examples of the strength based poses.
So, for instance, I would do poses that require more muscle activation than just kind of sinking down using gravity to just push you deeper into a pose. We would do more drills and more little tweaks to poses where it requires more strength. So obviously I do a lot of drills. For instance, yoga spends a lot of time stretching the hamstrings, and it doesn't do really any stretching of the quads or engaging of the quads. So I will spend the first part of the class engaging and firing up the quads with little and then hip flexor movements. So that would be an example, but it's not really something I would add in there rather than change as such.
And so it sounds like what happened is you started to look at all the activations as the more of an emphasis, like how can you activate more muscle in different positions. And of course, on a podcast where it's mostly auditory, we're not going to get a very good picture. I'm sure at the end of the show we'll tell people where they can find you on YouTube and your website and such. But
Yeah.
what do you think happened where you realized this passive collapsy stretchy stuff? What do you think triggered that insight? Was there something happening in your own body or your students' bodies?
It's a really good question. So I noticed for quite a few months that my practice had plateaued. So I wasn't able to take it to the next level, and I was trying out sort of next level poses, and I wasn't really getting anywhere with that. However, that wasn't something that was the reason why I looked. I just thought, I needed to practice a bit more. And I ended up getting a personal trainer at the local health club that a couple of my private yoga students see, and was raving about him. And I'd just got a new boyfriend that was a little bit younger, and I thought, maybe I'll get a little personal trainer, and just I wanted some time for me, because I'm doing all this stuff for other people, doing all these privates, all these one-to-ones. I thought, I actually want to have a one-to-one doing something. So it was just I booked, I think it was 6 sessions with this personal trainer, and that 6 sessions turned into a 3-year relationship, going every week. And not relationship like that, but relationship.
Yes, a practice. It turned into an ongoing practice with
exactly. And
yeah.
I think what was really, really interesting is on our second, it might have been the first, but I have a feeling it was the second session, he basically did he made me do all these weird movements and took me into this room and made me move my leg in that way and hit something and lean and do all these weird tests. Okay. And I thought, I'm going to pass this with flying colours, blah, 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 blah. And I sort of did everything, and I thought, yeah, that seemed to go quite well. And he literally, at the end, he's like, right, your hip flexors have turned off, your quads are dominant, your glutes aren't activated, you're this shoulder. And I was like, well, I was told that yoga was the be all and end all kind of thing, still stuck in my my teacher said yoga is everything. And so I was a bit okay. So I was quite surprised at that. But obviously being very open-minded was fine, okay, this guy knows his stuff. Let's see if it is that bad kind of thing. And he would have me do simple exercise, have my leg sit on the floor, have my leg straight out in front of me, and just lift my leg off the floor, which is some of the stuff that I do with my students. My leg would not move, and I'm telling it to move, and I could not. And he's like, see, that's what I've told you, your hip flexors are completely misfiring. You spent all this time stretching the life out of them in yoga, and you haven't strengthened them. And it was just boom, he just showed me everything. And I was like, not only do I want to improve myself, but I want to learn from you. He made more sense than the yoga teachers and the training and you've got an injury because you've got, some trauma trapped in your metatarsal. It just made more sense. And the more I saw him, the more I learned about the body in a completely different way that I'd been taught in yoga, the more I developed that into my own teaching style, the more people were hitting peak poses that they'd never hit before, only in my class, because we'd spent time activating all these muscle groups. But my practice got out of the plateau and went right up here. And so it was just
wow.
Boom, 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 boom. And my bum came back.
What I heard in your story are several things that I also occurred to me is that without a way to measure whether something's working or not, we can get stuck chasing sensation. And I only learned from one of my mentors a few years ago that in fact, when we overstretch, we lose the ability to sense that we are doing damage or deactivating other parts of our body. And when the ligaments then get looser and looser and we chase, oh, I'm doing this for the feeling. I want to feel the stretch. Then we can lean more and more into dysfunction without any guardrails to put us back into the most resilient form. And that's why I like what you're awakening with the personal trainer. It was kind of similar to something that happened to me as well is I remember doing this training where we were there was a lot of springiness, there was a lot of intelligence to it, but there was also a lot of improv. And I went to a personal trainer and they said my tensegrity was like hot melted pizza cheese, like not buoyant, not resilient, not strong. And when they did some of the same measures, I was surprised at how little full body springy collaboration I was creating, mostly because I didn't have tests. I didn't have a sense of how could I tell if I'm getting, more integrated, more resilient or less. So I know that as a collapsy hypermobile person, I ended up gravitating towards the collapsy hypermobile things. And at least as someone who grew up as an athlete, I think at least you've got some reference back to what it felt like when your body could do whatever it wanted. But so tell me, so you had this awakening, you go back to your practice, your students start hitting they start making progress too.
Yeah.
Right? What we've both learned is that what we want is more distributed collaboration between the systems of the body. And we don't want to target, oh, I'm just going to stretch that hamstring. We both learned that there are these ways to turn more of the system on. So, and that's one other thing I learned is just because something feels hard doesn't mean it's right. And just because something feels easy doesn't mean it's right. That we need to be working with that our perception can actually be a little bit off if we don't look outside of ourselves. And that's one reason I call this the architecture of health. It's the inner and outer, checking back outside of yourself, but
Yeah.
always going back in. So tell me, what as you've evolved as this leader in movement and yoga, what patterns have you seen in your students just over and over that that are you constantly need to help them with, whether it's a motivation, it's a sense, it's a physical practice?
I think the only thing that really comes to mind, because I had such a variety of people, from prisons to studios to running clubs to people in wheelchairs, I can't really say that there was a common denominator other than the fact that people think that tightness equals to I need to stretch more. And what I've learned actually a lot of the time is tightness can be a big example of the muscle being weaker and the body tightening up that muscle to protect it. So, I hear it from yoga teachers all the time, like, oh, I need to do yoga every day because otherwise I just feel tight. I'm thinking, if you're doing yoga every day and you're stretching every day, the chances are you're probably not. Your muscles are so weak and they're so scared of that they've just tightened up. Because what I found was the more stronger I got, the less I need to stretch. I can stretch once every 2 weeks and still be the same flexibility. I stopped doing yoga for about a year this last year, and I've gone back to pretty much exactly the same flexibility I was before. But what I was doing is I was just maintaining my strength and my nervous system. So I think it's this conspiracy that if I'm tight, I need to stretch, when actually a lot of the time we need to strengthen. There are, sometimes if people are doing a repetitive, like boxers, they're tight in the chest, it's a postural thing. It's probably not weakness, it's probably just posture and overdoing it. But a lot of the time, generally, when I'm seeing mums that are coming in and people that don't really exercise, or at desks, and they're like, I'm tight, it's not because they're strong and they've got into a movement pattern. It's in fact because they're weak. And so I would do more of a strength-based process with them rather than stretching the muscle that's already overstretched.
And stretching, I definitely think is overrated. In fact, if you stretch before a movement practice more than 5 seconds in each position, you actually decrease the muscle's ability to respond and perform. So I've seen dancers all over like, oh, I've got to stretch before class. No, you need to warm the tissue, but there are a lot of ways to do that. In fact, I learned with to prepare for something like running, just bouncing and shaking warms the whole body and the fascia, all the systems, instead of these kind of like pushy, targeted, like I'm going to make it that weak thing even weaker. And I agree about strength. I remember when I was at one point, I taught 15 yoga classes a week back in the 90s, and I had the phone number 1-800-LOVE-YOGA. I knew it was going to be in every gym. It was going to be everywhere. But the more I did it, I plateaued. I was getting more, my nervous system was getting dysregulated. I couldn't tell that I was getting more and more rib flare and hyperextended, my pelvis dumping. I didn't have any outside markers, even though I was going to like extremely skilled teachers who were running Yoga Journal, or well, one was even in Rolling Stone magazine here in the United States back in the 90s. And then one day, when a coworker at this desktop publishing job I had said, you might want to check this other thing out. And I was having a crisis. Everything was changing around, and I was complaining all the time about sitting at my computer. And I went, and it showed me that the world's best movers don't stretch at all.
Wow.
They don't stretch at all. Well, except like cats, doing that, like wake up in the morning, downward dog is based on an animal that moves through it, not an animal that holds it. And so once I learned what?
That's true. Yeah.
And once I learned that villagers in West Africa who could carry almost their body weight effortlessly on their head, as long as they have help getting it on there the right way and they have good posture, which they do when they're in an environment where they're using their body ancestrally, I was like, oh my gosh, like I fell apart. I cried for a week. I fell apart. I switched over to West African dance, thinking at least this will give me these postural patterns. And there are a lot of things great about it, but I still had to change my root ways of moving as a Western person that sits in a chair. So why I said all that is so I stopped doing yoga, but I'd like every 6 months or year, I'd go back to a yoga class, and I was better than when I used to do yoga all the time. So,
absolutely.
But the strengthening, now that I'm 56, the smart strength training, I can't imagine anyone aging well without some sort of resistance-based movement. So great. What other kinds of changes in the way you teach have happened since you had this epiphany?
So interestingly, I used to have all my own classes, so I pretty much, was in control of what I wanted to teach. And, obviously at studios, you have that sort of semi-freedom as well. But I remember I was in the peak of like learning from Kevin, and my practice was getting better. And I was just every week I was inspired by something that we did in our PT session. I took it into the yoga. And I got a job at this new studio that was this big studio that was setting up in southeast London, and I told her about like this flow that I had developed, and it's called functional flow, because I'm like, why do people want to spend all this money and all this time on their mats when it's not actually going to benefit them in their everyday life? Why are we doing something that's just going to benefit them for that 1 hour when they're on a mat? Imagine something that can benefit every aspect of their life. What an investment that is, and within 3 weeks, mine was the busiest class for the full 2 years that I was there. 42 people every Tuesday. It we had people in the hallway with mats,
Wow.
squeezing them in, and that wasn't like that in any other class. I'm not saying that necessarily I'm a better teacher, but what I was doing was hitting them in a way that none of the other classes were doing. They're like, I felt like it was the bridge between beginner and or advanced. So all the activations, when we came to do peak poses, that maybe they can't get in other teachers' classes because perhaps they haven't sequenced it intelligently, they were getting, and they were coming up to me at the end, and they're like, I've just got first, I've been trying to do this for ages, and I always get these in your classes, and blah, 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 and it was great. But it was so great to be recognised by the people that were there every week. But, you know, the other teachers, they're just kind of like, you know, it sounds different or this or that. So, you know, it wasn't kind of welcomed in the industry.
I've got to know more. Functional flow. What a beautiful name. And that's, as I'm developing something myself, that I see that when people move freely, I can see the biomechanical deficiencies but yet I also know there have to be simple ways. Like yoga, one of the best things about yoga is its position and breath. And when I want to change how someone's running, I don't just change how there are just too many things going on. There's no way to coach the 1,000 different things happening in a moving body. So instead, backing off and taking part of a pattern, kind of like the yoga traditions do. You know, where do you put your attention? How do you activate postural tone? How do you send a breath? And as I'm designing something like that, I'm playing with this idea of springy yoga. Like, how do you restore the springs of the body so that it gets into functional movement? Because everyday movement it's a vastly different thing than a linear and controlled flattening practice. And we have to twist and bend to get in and out of chairs. So there is a great reason to apply a lot of intention and activation, and as long as it prioritizes. And that's why I love what you're saying, is you are helping people prioritize by saying this crosses over to your everyday life, which any great movement practice will. It's not what happens in the hour we're together. It's how does that take you into the other 23 hours of the day? So can you tell me a little, I'm just fascinated, functional flow. How did it look different than the other teachers' classes? I mean, and one thing I heard you say is you would show someone the difference between what they were doing and you give them little hints where they would have these capability breakthroughs. Are there other ways that your class looks, functional flow look different than other yoga teachers that you know?
Interestingly, this all happened about 4 or 5 years ago now. And since then, a really well-known yogi called Adele Bridges, who's huge, she actually, about 2 years later, started talking about a functional flow, and I thought it won't be long till it catches on, kind of thing. Not that I'd ever spoke about it, but she's very functional as well, and she kind of goes down more in depth down that way than I do. And she's, because obviously I've taken a back seat with it all, she's definitely somebody that I would recommend, and she's taken it a lot further, and her practice demonstrates that as well. But I think the experienced teachers sequence intelligently. So I'm not saying mine was vastly different from every teacher. The ones that got it, they got it, you know. But I've been to classes where they'll do camel pose as the third pose, and they'll like do a load of hamstring stretchy flows and then stick a wheel in towards the end, having done nothing on the shoulders, the spine, the hip flexors, activation for the glutes, strengthen the back body and stretch the front body to allow that space, you know. So for me, it was just an intelligent way of first warming up, activating little drills, little movements, things that the studio owner would look and think, what is she doing? But the clients are really, really feeling it, that they're feeling that something is happening. So they're just very small, mainly drills, a lot of core, glute activations, because I've noticed there's a lot of stretching of the glutes in yoga and not too much of the glute activation, a lot more leg work, a lot more, just strength stuff. And then it would be sequenced where it would, warm the specific muscle groups up and activate them to basically get the most out of whatever pose or whatever our topic of the class was to achieve. So I wouldn't say it would look too different, other than the fact that there would be more drills. So it would be less sun salutations and more, right, let's do some drills.
So let's talk about the word drills. Well, I love that word because it doesn't remind me of like a pose. Can you tell me, like, what do you mean by the word drills?
I mean, like a small, effective, repetitive movement that's designed to wake up, activate, and strengthen certain muscle groups. So, for instance, I would say like doing 20 sit-ups would be like a drill. And like I've said, my quad drill would be lifting the legs up. So, it's not a yoga pose, but we're doing something.
And what I love is it has movement that's not risky. It's a drill that you put in a context. And that's the other thing I've found is people like me who a lot of my life I've been exercising or stretching out of anxiety, and I think more like I got to go bigger sun salutation. I've got to do a complicated dance step. And the thing is, I can't do that mindfully. When we've gone beyond our integrity, our integrity might be in a very small range where we could, and yet working within, intelligently working within ranges and picking simple things to work on, like you're saying, you can build up towards executing much more demanding and complex things, but you have to have that ramp that you're talking about. And your students could feel that you've designed this experience. But from the outside, it would just like, oh, she does a few more calisthenics than other teachers. But that complicated thing at the end, you knew the common ways people were likely to stress the wrong tissue. And so you knew how to design it in so it just built them up. So like that's one thing I remember someone telling me that Feldenkrais has said is like, there aren't improper moves, there's just improper preparation. I would also actually I do think there are improper moves, honestly, but the emphasis on preparing for different possibilities. What?
Prepare to what is it? Fail to prepare. Prepare to fail, fail to prepare, or something like that. But yeah, preparation is key.
And yet, and the paradox is life is so complicated, we can't really prepare. Yet, we do know there are certain things human beings have done since we stood on two legs. And one of those things is we stand and we walk. And so one thing I've learned is if something makes me worse at the basic things human beings that distinguish human beings from other animals, like if it makes me worse at standing or walking, then I need to address that. And of course, I also learned that there are different ways to sit and there are different so why I said all that is when I was 8, I watched a TV show and I sat in lotus pose all the time. And I didn't realize till I had a PE class where they forced us to run or walk a mile. And I couldn't even walk a mile, that I had just worked completely against my design until I had something to measure it against. So I love this functional flow. So what do you do now? What is a day look like now? Are you teaching a lot? Are you giving a lot of retreats and workshops?
I'm not actually at the moment. I ended up moving from London, where my business was really successful through COVID. I moved out to the countryside, and so no, I don't think the demand is as great out here. I think people are more connected to nature, and they've all got big. Not everyone, I'm generalizing, but people have got bigger gardens and they're going out gardening and they've got their hens, and some of them have horses and they go for walks with their dogs. And I think obviously everyone physically kind of needs yoga, but they don't have that London stress where they need to do all the breath work just to kind of almost return home to themselves, because I feel like people are already home here. But no, and I think it was, I think as well, as we've spoken before, I think I lost my respect. I lost a lot of respect for the yoga industry, and I just felt like I was such a black sheep again in such an industry that didn't feel authentic to me. Even the way that I moved and the way that I tried to bring in these techniques that had worked for my body so well, and just getting like slammed down by studio owners and having opinions on health things I felt really strongly about, and getting dropped by students. And then the whole you've got to be vegan thing, and that felt like it almost killed me once. And I just felt like the movements are not sitting right. There's teachers out there that are promoting an experimental thing on people that didn't sit right. The veganism didn't sit right. The whole thing didn't sit right. So I felt like I was almost a fraud in the industry, and I felt like I shouldn't be there because I didn't agree with a lot of everything that was going on. So I've had to be authentic to myself. I had to take a step back, and I had to just do me for a while.
I love everything you just said. And to recap why, starting with the idea of your environment. This show is called Architecture of Health. It's not only what we consciously practice, it's what we surround ourselves with. And ancestrally, people having more space behave differently. Your eyes and your breath, everything changes when you're in a more expansive place. And there is a cost to being in small, tight, crowded quarters. And I like what you're saying about picking up things, getting on and off of a horse, walking a dog, gardening. That's a very rich movement terrain where the upside is you don't even really have to think so much about how you move, unless you have such a flawed movement pattern that you tweak your back gardening. And unfortunately, the crowd I run with, most of us are over 50 over here, and almost all of them are the aches and pains are showing up. But there's always a way to get back to the way we were designed to be. But one other thing I like that you're saying is there was this religion, this yoga religion that you had to encounter in terms of rigid viewpoints around veganism and around how to move. When, as I mentioned before, it was shocking to me to realize that yoga is we're mostly doing modern exercises. And ancestrally, I even learned that the oldest yoga
there was
originally
or something. There was
right, and one of the stories I heard was that it was undulating waves that put you in a trance when you're standing, and undulating waves laying down. And that's one reason I lead a women's breathing group where we do those things to try to get into the original ideas, this union. And maybe there are still yogas that do plenty of that, and I'm sure like Kundalini, there's got to be some alignment with that. At the same time, I only learned recently that a lot of the poses that people currently call yoga came from the military, that was the colonial powers that were in India, and it was the gymnastics routines that the soldiers were doing that influenced the movement culture, which is a rigid system promoting conformity, and everybody gets their yoga mat, their little square mat. You can't go outside of your mat. You must all do the same thing. So that's one thing that I learned from one of my mentors, and which really surprised me. And yet there's something there, or it wouldn't be so popular. What's there is attention to breath and things that build strength in positions. Since we're most of us sedentary people are only using two or a couple of positions of our bodies. At the same time, if we connect back to authentic health, it's, there has never been an intergenerational ancestral tribe that was vegan. If it
Yeah,
existed, it died in one generation because they become infertile, and a vegan diet doesn't support infants. So I'm glad we're sisters in examining the narratives and finding an I'm a black sheep too. All the I had a very unpopular opinion during COVID, and I got censored. I got banned, blocked, called a racist,
yeah,
called a whatever. I mean, what is it? A right wing, whatever, which I'm not. And I'm not. We're just authentically looking for being the best way we can be and managing our well-being in a modern context.
yeah.
Are there okay, you are in the country, you've functional flow is a way that you've taught and something that you practice. When are there any trade-off, like once you found functional flow or and the ways of moving with strength, were there other things that you were able to stop doing or spend less money on, and so that it turned out being a kind of a time or economic win?
Well, it was kind of like I went back to the gym, which I always used to go to before becoming a yoga teacher, and just did sort of everything that I used to do and more that I'd learnt through Kevin. And I didn't need to go to yoga classes 3 or 4 times a week because I didn't feel like I needed to stretch all the time, and I still enjoy it as a change. I love the hot yoga because it's just in winter and it's freezing. You go and sit in a nice hot room and just move and stretch. It's lovely, but I just found, even when I wasn't a member of a gym, I would go out on my bike around the forest. I would do paddle boarding. I would do exercises in my garden. I have a big tractor's tire. I'd flip down the garden. I had a log that I would log press. Just like your standard movements, you squat, you deadlift, you pull, you push, you twist, your core.
The basics. You go back to the
Yeah.
basics. I've done the same thing. I joined a gym for like $50 a month, and I don't have this compulsive need to go sign up for more and more classes. Yeah, simple. And you're even out in nature where it's got a more organic, an even more organic, even cheaper way to practice.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just find that, fitness works on numerous different levels. And I think as long as you do a bit of cardio for your heart and your lungs, functional movements, so functional patterns, your lunges and your squats and things like that, and then strength, and then you're pretty much sorted, really. We don't need to overcomplicate it. Just get out and do things you
Just
enjoy.
get
Hiking, dog walking, paddleboarding, swimming, and then do some weights, it's quite simple, really.
wow. I think that's a great place to end. And finally, how can my listeners learn more about any offerings you have? Whether you have the website www.hannahpresenceyoga.com. That'll be in the show notes. Anything else that anyone who wants to learn more about the way that you've helped people who do want to do functional flow yoga?
Yes, I have some YouTube videos, small little 10-minute videos that are more the traditional yoga that people would want on YouTube. But I have a lot of my functional flow classes on a online catalog that you can have access. There's about 100 videos on there. Some of them, 20 of them might be functional flow. Some of them might be more spiritual and more working with energy and energy lines, and some of them will be more flexibility focused, and some will be purely strength. I've got a few ab videos. Yeah, there's a whole mixture there because I used to teach so much. I like to mix it up myself, but functional flow was definitely my favorite, and the one that definitely had the biggest impact on people, and the one that people would come back more for. So yeah, that's how you can see those videos. And sometimes I do workshops and retreats, and I have a few workshops coming up around the UK this year, and maybe I'll get back into retreats. But yeah, we'll just see how it goes. We'll see if I get called back to the yoga, or whether it's time for me to.
Or it's something new. I'm in the middle of a recreation process. I'm imagining a very different kind of event than I ever did before, where, yeah, I don't know, where it has a level of play, it has a level of strength, it has a level of food. There's some, and it's not going to be some pristine, special, separate experience that doesn't map to my everyday life.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, community, I have to say, the yoga classes, just having a place to go, whether it's a gym or a studio, you get to see other people and you
Yeah.
get to at least feel your body. I love getting back to those things. And so your website, hannahpresenceyoga.com, we will definitely keep in touch. Is there any last thing you want to say before we end?
Yeah, definitely. I think the key takeaway from this is there's not a one size fits all, and there's not just one thing to do for your body. Go to the dance class, go climbing, go to yoga, go to the gym, go do as many different ways of expressing your body as possible, and many different diets, as many different foods, as many different, like everything. It always comes back to balance. And I think, just going full force into the yoga like I did and ended up with loads of injuries. And
Me too.
yeah, it's not, nothing is a complete system unless you have a variety of everything in your life. That's what I would say.
That's a perfect note to end the show on. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for getting me started doing this. I
No,
love
well
doing it.
done. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.